This investigation is sponsored by Enlisted. Whether you're fighting for control of Alpha Centauri in 2339 or Guadalcanal in 1942, you're gonna need some boots on the ground. Enlisted puts you in the thick of that action as you fight across the fiercest, most famous battles of the Second World War. And as someone who's always throwing around words like realistic and grounded, Enlisted accomplishes something very challenging: immersing players in the realities of these conflicts while keeping gameplay dynamic, challenging, and fun. Dozens of soldiers, armored cars, tanks, fighters, and bombers give every match a tremendous sense of scale, while campaigns like the Battle of Moscow or the invasion of Normandy allow you to fight through the course of these historical events. But it's the squad system that to me really sets Enlisted apart. Being able to seize a position and then swap between different soldiers in your unit that you've customized with different weapons and equipment is incredibly satisfying. So let the word go out from this time and place. If anyone wants to take the Red October Tractor Factory, they're gonna have to deal with Marky Mark and the Stalingrad Snowmen first. Enlisted is available on PC, Xbox Series X and S, and PlayStation 5, as well as the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One with cross-platform support. There's no purchase necessary. Once you've downloaded the game, you're ready to roll. But if you use our link in the description, you'll get access to a few free bonuses, including 3 days of premium time and several orders for soldiers and weapons. So, our thanks to Enlisted for sponsoring this episode, and I'll see you on the beaches, the landing grounds, in the fields, in the streets, and in the hills. You may have heard the expression that generals are always fighting the last war. The idea being that military leadership, or just human beings really, have the tendency to prepare for future challenges with an over-reliance on lessons from the past, while at the same time struggling to understand how evolving technology, shifting circumstances, and other developments might impact a future conflict. It's difficult enough to predict what a major war might look like 5 years from now. Which new systems will prove their worth, which tactics will become outdated, and who the enemy might even be. Try and predict what an interstellar war might look like hundreds of years in the future with space battles and planetary invasions, and, well, everyone has their own unique take.
The wars of the future will not be fought on a battlefield or at sea. They will be fought in space, or possibly on top of a very tall mountain.
But there is one conclusion out there that, while I can't prove is wrong, appears to me at least to be an oversimplification of a complex question. And it's the assertion that in a realistic interstellar conflict, planetary armies, if they exist at all, will be limited to these very elite smaller units. Under this viewpoint, mass armies of conscripts or even professional formations over a certain size, say a division or bigger, are considered archaic and obsolete. So if that complex question comes down to how big will interstellar armies be, in this episode of Incoming, I want to try to answer that. Not with an oversimplification, but by looking at how and why armies are the size they are. To begin though, why is it that so many people are convinced that within an interstellar futuristic context, bigger armies will be ineffectual and unrealistic? Well, that's actually not that hard to answer. If you grew up in the 1990s and 2000s, in this reality at least, you got to experience a unipolar world. The Soviet Union had collapsed, free market liberal democracy had triumphed over everything else, and the idea that there would be another major global or even regional conflict seemed absurd. A book published in 1992 popularized the term the end of history to describe this phenomenon, and many people took this literally, even though that wasn't what the book was actually saying. But there was this idea that human civilization had kind of wrapped things up, figured everything out. And when magazines were running photos of dozens of B-52 bombers being scrapped, and in every Pizza Hut around the world there was a dine-in buffet, it was really hard to argue against that idea that human civilization had reached this peak it would never fall from.
So when your appetite says buffet and your budget says bargain, Pizza Hut's got all you can eat. Call your hometown Pizza Hut restaurant for Sunday buffet serving hours. $3.99 for adults and $1.99 for kids.
Pizza Hut, making it great.
Now, as it turns out, history did have a bit of life left in it. War didn't completely go away, but it did seem to have evolved into this hyper-advanced, smaller-scale exercise. The only major battles would occur during a brief, decisive opening strike, and the conflict would then transition into some kind of insurgency, punctuated by high-intensity actions possibly, but rarely on the scale of anything seen in World War II, Korea, or Vietnam. We actually saw this codified in the organization of the United States Army, which moved from divisions to smaller battalions as its primary unit of action. In this environment, it wasn't unreasonable to look at this pattern of decreasing intensity in conflicts and make the assumption that by the year 2300 or so, this trend will have transformed the way conventional forces look and operate. Maybe you don't even need an army, just a fleet and a small marine corps. But if you were to ask why armies seem destined to become smaller and smaller, you might get different explanations. Evolving technology is a big one. In the future, we'll likely be able to achieve more with less. Or maybe the theory is that most of the actual fighting in future conflicts will be done on the interstellar scale between starships, and planetary armies will only need to mop things up. But while evolving technology, hardware, and tactics can certainly influence the size of military formations, I'm not sure we can count on them to become the principal drivers of that change. More likely than not, I think the size of the interstellar armed forces of the future will be determined by pretty much the same factors that exist right now here on Earth. To illustrate what perhaps might be the most important of those, I'd like to introduce the Commonwealth of Sol. This is an interstellar polity consisting of Earth and its many colonies. It has a mostly inoffensive democratic government, a nice blue flag, and a few good hockey teams. And wouldn't you know it, in the year 2300, the Commonwealth Army is barely being used. It might have these massive formations of infantry, tanks, and artillery, but in the types of conflicts it's preparing for, we are indeed mostly seeing a reliance on those smaller elite formations. But hold on a second, because in a parallel reality, the Commonwealth of Sol is mostly identical. Same inoffensive government, blue flag, and hockey teams, except now their army and navy is exponentially larger, and the battles they're preparing for involve formations of an absolutely staggering size. There is a mixture of professional units and conscripts, and the entire state has become incredibly militarized. And then, in a third reality, things don't seem to make sense at all. Commonwealth of Sol is preparing for massive battles involving gigantic armies, and yet its armed forces are incredibly small, just enough to maintain a reserve of equipment. So what's going on here? What has caused the Commonwealth to adopt three radically different approaches to the size of its interstellar armies? Now, this may sound obvious, but it all comes down to the interstellar or geopolitical situation that a nation finds itself within. That security environment, more than anything else, is likely going to be the deciding factor. In that first example, things are a lot like the 1990s. The Gargosian Empire, the hated foe of all humanity, has disintegrated, and the Commonwealth is now surrounded by a bunch of smaller, weaker powers, unlikely to pose any real threat for the foreseeable future. The security environment is relatively stable, so the Commonwealth defense strategy is mostly based on the idea of power projection. Even if the armed forces are unlikely to be fighting a major war against a peer adversary, as the dominant nation in its corner of the galaxy, the Commonwealth might still need to intervene in smaller scale operations to maintain its interests and influence. But in Scenario 2, things are different. The Gargosian Empire has not only survived, but managed to annex territories in a number of worlds that also host Commonwealth colonies. The national defense strategy, therefore, has to look quite a bit different. A large-scale, peer-to-peer conflict is likely, and its opening stages are going to involve a number of ground battles across many different star systems. Massive armies, the kinds able to hold a front line that might be thousands of miles long, are now suddenly critical. And in that final scenario, things are real bad. Not only are the Gargosians back and bigger than ever, but the Commonwealth is now bordered on the other side by the even more evil Zorgon Dominion. Both powers are overwhelmingly superior to humanity, and a conventional victory is extremely unlikely. In this situation, the best the Commonwealth can do is pursue a strategy unlikely to alienate either potential adversary. So things like projecting power across the galaxy, that's out. Instead, the Commonwealth is focused on trying to make its conquest as unattractive a prospect as it can, even if either of its enemies could theoretically achieve it. This might be accomplished by maintaining a very small permanent army, but a rotating force of conscripts that can quickly be mobilized in the event of war. In this system, during peacetime, the strain of the armed forces on the economy is minimal, which is good if you simply can't compete with your rivals in terms of sheer numbers. But in an emergency, it can rapidly mobilize into an exponentially larger force, enough to give either power pause. This is a strategic gamble, but it achieves the desired result of deterring both powers while minimizing the economic burden. Now, these examples are ultimately simplistic and don't factor in a number of other considerations, but I think this shows how, depending on the situation a nation finds itself within, Both a mass force of conscripts and smaller elite formations are both equally realistic and sensible. It all comes down to the respective threats and challenges they're facing, the environment they're operating within. Now, in an ideal situation, that security environment would be the only factor a nation would use in determining the size of its armed forces or any other aspect of its organization and function. The reality is, though, that political, economic, and societal pressures often complicates this straightforward approach. Let's abandon the Commonwealth and look at some other alternate worlds. If defense contracts providing hardware to the United States Colonial Marines, for example, are particularly lucrative, Weyland-Yutani might decide it's in its best interest to fund some political action groups. And what a surprise, they all agree that the armed forces are dangerously understrength, regardless of whether or not that's actually true. The New Republic, meanwhile, might find itself in a very dangerous situation, surrounded by Imperial remnant forces that individually might match its own military strength and collectively be superior. While the large military might be prudent given the current threat environment, memories of the Empire and a lack of public support makes a policy of extensive military rearmament challenging to implement. We might even look at New Helghan and come to the conclusion that having been so soundly defeated in 2 previous wars, its current armed forces are mostly just for show, a source of national pride and more intended to boost the image of the government than to be a credible deterrence against external threats. The end of history was this idea that the ascendancy of Western liberal democracies would limit future conflicts and in turn vastly decrease the size of modern armies. That very well might be true. But with both the unipolar world of the 1990s and Pizza Hut buffets a distant memory, I think it's clear that we can't tell exactly how far away the end of history actually is. If we're lucky, it will occur in this reality before we establish an interstellar civilization, and warfare, when it does occur, would be limited in scope and intensity. But I think it's a mistake to treat that as a certainty, to make the blanket statement that the further into the future we go, the smaller armies will become. That, to me, sounds like someone overlearning the lessons of the last war, which is one of the better ways to lose the next one. Thanks again to Enlisted for sponsoring this investigation into interstellar armies. Use the link in the description below to get enlisted on your platform of choice along with those special bonuses. And if you run into me and my squad in those trenches, offer no quarter, for none shall be given in return.